I started like a lot of you. We bought raw land, we built a house. I didn't want a Silicon Valley tract house. Bottom line, right? I grew up in a California that had 10 million people. I would watch what was happening, I didn't like it. I didn't want a house like that. I wanted to save a little piece of California that I'd seen as a child. My mom and dad used to throw me in the back of a 53 Plymouth, and we'd go off through Calaveras, big trees, or to Muir Woods or whatever. And all summer long, I'd go to Muir Woods once a week at least. And I learned what a forest was. A forest is more than just a stand of trees. Okay? We need biodiversity. Forests need biodiversity. Well, this was hardly that. All the green stuff on the ground you see here, the guy who was selling it to us had mowed all the broom. That's all broom. We had 10 acres of broom. The hilltop was like that. That was where they thought we'd put the house. They were wrong. The rest of it was like this. This is actually better than most of it. I had to crawl on a lot of the property just to find my way around. I was leaving bits of survey tape on bushes so I could find my way back. Breadcrumbs. That same hilltop. In the date is a joke. It was overnight, right? But to me now, this is the big deal. Little things. This is the foundation of biodiversity. We don't know how it works. I didn't know that when I started. I just wanted it native. But I didn't know what that was. And I'll tell you this, I still don't. Because it varies so much from place to place and from time to time. And these plants take a long time to spread around again because the native seed bank is largely dead where we are. The good news is that we're an advanced case. Mountain Charlie Road was first the Spanish Trail between missions. Our weed problem started 200 years ago. So it's not so bad in a lot of other places. And I think it's savable. But that means we have to get off our cans and save it. Little things. So, I'm going to start with why we need native plants, the whole system, the whole successional system from the beginning to the end. A lot of native plant projects, they just go out, they put some perennials out there and they call it good. Because they know that dealing with the little stuff, the annuals, is really hard. And it takes too much labor and it takes too long, and nobody's going to pay them for that. But this is the basis for the system. Everything else, life, gets its food from plants, gets its energy. It's the only thing that's converting solar energy into food. Why they're called autotrophs. And the more species you have of plants, the more species of bugs you get. Well, birds need bugs. Some need berries, not a lot. But you know, if you convert the things that make berries to broom, guess what? No food. But there's more significant than that. There's a good scientist in Delaware, did some work recently, his name is Doug Ptolemy. He found that 95% of what birds feed their young is caterpillars. No bugs, no birds. And what do you know? But the bugs have specific relationships with plants. If you want biodiversity so that you can have different kinds of bugs that can deal with differences in conditions over long periods of time. Right? Working?
Now they can hear you loud and clear.
Is this working? Yes. Good. Okay. And the second part about annual plants is forage for wildlife. And we make a lot of mistakes in thinking that we have a lot of deer. But actually, deer numbers are way down. And the reason is forage and predation. The reason we don't see that, or we don't recognize it that way, is one of the few places where there's food and forage for wildlife, for deer, is around houses. So the deer come there to eat. And these are right in front of our house here. This guy is, did you turn the lights on? That was good. Okay. This guy right here, he's noshing on tar weeds. This one here is eating on, I think, hedge nettle. I don't like that so much. But you know, when you grow all these different things, you get to find out what they eat. But in most places around here, all they get is acorns, which are fine for protein, but it won't balance the skeletal structure. Here's a deer the Mid-Peninsula Open Space Authority published in the newspaper. They were proud of this. But look at the forage and look at that animal. Here's one of ours. Is that obvious enough? Right? Okay, so there was plenty of forage, or plenty of rain in January of 2013. But there's little to eat. Little, and more importantly, they also published this picture from one of their trail cams. I wouldn't be proud of that cat. And look at the ground around it. Look at the forest behind him. Where are the annuals? They're just not there. That's the way most of these mountains are now. Because we've allowed succession to run amok. This is our backyard in September. Now there's been no water used at all. These plants labeled blue curls, okay, they're annuals. You ever seen one? I had to send an example to the herbarium because they didn't have one either. But you can see we got a lot of them. Well, why don't we have them? They don't germinate until March and April. Now, I want you to think about a plant that grows that big after germinating in March or April. How the hell does it what's it do for water? Do we know? No, we don't. It's clearly a fungal relationship, but we don't know how that works. Okay, but there's something more important about blue curls. That's like out of somebody's Hieronymus Bosch painting, isn't it? Okay. Bees go nuts for these things. And they bloom from say July to October. Native bees don't make honey. They need pollen all summer, or they don't make it. We have 1,200 species of bees in California. Okay. European honeybees do maybe 30% of the pollinating. So it matters. Learning how to grow things that keep the system going. This is in June on our place, so blue curl's just coming up. I don't know how they do it. But they sure have friends. You see that structure that in the flower that has the pollen anthers on the end? That big arching thing? And it puts it right on their backs. That's one of those. I was there for an hour taking pictures and I got lucky. Okay, so The flip side of this, of course, is that native plants need us, and you're not going to get them if all you've got is broom. But this is Jasper Ridge Biological Preserve at Stanford. And what you're looking at is a place with 960 acres. They have a $1.5 million budget, and you can bet that almost all of it is spent in the office building. Vegetative transects on this land, between 75 and 95% exotic. Star thistle, oats, poverty grass. You know, and you see all the trees coming in. This was a ranch. They are coming in. This is being converted to forest slowly. Serpentine soils are rotten, so they slow it down. Okay, so, but they're preserving it. The interesting story, they got, anybody here heard of stinkwort? Nasty plant, right? Okay, smells bad, 30,000 seeds per plant. They stick on animals, they fly in the air, and absolutely nothing will eat it. It's toxic, in fact. Okay, well, they started getting to trickia. We had their chief scientist, who was Nona Chiarello, at our place. And she said, well, we got rid of the trickia when it came in. And I said, good, what are you going to do with the star thistle? And she looked at me like, what, are you kidding? Or the oats. Well, this is what grows under those patches of coyote bush you saw, right here. Right here. That's all coyote bush. And that's oats and star thistle. And then there's the fungal ring around some of them where nothing grows. And so what this is a product of something. It's a belief. It's a belief that, first of all, it says that if it's natural, it's not us. That we're not part of it. That it doesn't depend on us. That we're to fear doing something because we might be damaging things. This is almost all of the regulation that we see is negative, to control something, to keep something from happening. But do you know when the Constitution was written, the word regular meant to make regular, to make it frequent, to make it happen without restraint. And so you can just see how our language has been changed by this belief structure. And our belief structure is also changed by the language. Well, this has been a problem for a long time. This is the Presidio in San Francisco in 1816. And you'll notice, you see up here and over here, this is all covered over. I promise you, this is coyote bush. But why is it in and around the Presidio itself? Well, there they are. Horses. Herbivory. Animals tearing it up and chewing on stuff and keeping the green stuff growing, keeping the annuals going, and that's what's happening in here. Now, yeah, it's being invaded, and yeah, that's going bad. But the point is that a successional system like that takes out all that early successional stuff, unless some disturbance happens. But the belief has been, for the longest time, that we just let these things go, and that's okay. But that was a uniquely European belief that was brought here. So this is how a successional system is taught in schools. Am I correct? Okay, good. This is primary succession. There's a big difference between what's called primary succession and secondary succession. And most of what we have is the latter. Primary succession says is that first you get your bryophytes and your
mosses and other stuff, and they start making dirt, and then come the clovers and jazz, and maybe some grasses and shrubs, and then trees. And each time it says that the soil depth is getting better. Well, that's not true either, but that's, that's how it's being shown. So here we have them, or we did. This is on a rock wall opposite our property, on a neighbor's property, and since a new neighbor moved in and took it over, all of this is gone. But these are your bryophytes. These are mosses and these Estrella. Those, the herbarium didn't have a sample of those either. We sent them one. There was a guy who was interested in that stuff. But you can see it's sloughing off, right? And then it's being caught here by this little ledge, and then up are coming the clovers. This is a primary soil formation process right before your eyes. So this is primary succession in action. So in areas of high disturbance like that rock wall where things fall off really easily, that's still happening, as long as you get rid of the weeds. This is secondary succession in action. This is Yellowstone National Park in 2010, which places it 12 years after the fire. Do you see biodiversity? No. Do you see a forest that's going to become a decent forest? No. So, does it look like it's ready to blow up again already? Yeah. Like, that's a no-brainer, right? Some of the dead stuff from the prior fire is still on the ground down below here. It hasn't rotted yet. They lost 95% of the aspen forest in that park. It's gone. That was your primary forage for elk. Because they didn't do anything about the elk population to balance it with the amount of aspen that was producing in the, after the fire, whatever aspen came up, the elk wiped it out. This is after the Summit fire. And you can see 3 months upcoming the Manzanita, right? So this is secondary succession in action. Whatever's there to grow will grow. And in whatever order it will. So this is, I went up after the same photo shoot. This was the Croy fire, which I went up there because I was sort of hoping we'd get an area where the two burns would overlap. I really wanted to see that if it had actually happened, two burns 6 years apart. That would have been really interesting. But it didn't happen. But this manzanita is 8 feet tall in 6 years. Again, it might have grown some clovers and some other stuff that normally would be early successional plants right after the fire, and yeah, it did recontribute to that seed bank, and it probably helped. But it sure as hell isn't doing it now, right? And it's not likely to keep doing it if we had another fire. This is what's going to keep happening. We don't know how to deal with this. This is also after the Croy fire. It all depends upon what the condition of the cones are as to whether or not their pine trees are going to come up. They're called serotinous cones. They open up from the heat. So if the seeds are at the right level of maturity, bam, you're going to get a lot of lodgepole. But if they're not, you're not going to get any. So it's kind of hit or miss. It's an interesting business. But there's still a lot of standing fuel here, right? And all that lodgepole. This is a bomb. Okay. So secondary succession happens fast. This is a photograph from 1948. And you can see here, this is Station Ranch. Does anybody know what that is? It's along Mountain Charlie Road. There was a place where Mountain Charlie's cabin is. You've probably heard of that. Okay. And then down at the bottom of the road was Station Ranch. Okay. And a fellow by the name of Charlie Martin had a place down there where he collected tolls going up, and Charlie McKiernan collected tolls going down. Right? So it was a deal. But this was all the area that was also grazed. Okay, and this has been recently abandoned. But 1948, okay? Oops. This is that same property today. And I would tell you that this is usual. Would anybody here disagree with that? You see a lot of this in our area of the mountains. I don't know about yours. But is there anything to speak of to eat? Acorns, that's it. A lot of protein, but no minerals, a lot of stuff not there that you get from forests. And you can see that all these trees are a couple of generations apart, but they're no more than 50, 60 years old. They invaded that place and it just took off. This is what happens if you burn it a lot. This is Mesa Verde National Park. This is cheatgrass and musk thistle, miles of it. So light it on fire, and maybe you'll get some germination of those good plants that you wanted to grow. But maybe, or maybe not, they'll be able to reach maturity. And if they don't, you've lost an opportunity for a long time, right? And your probabilities of success go down each time you do that. So I say that this is a product of this belief system, but in reality we're ignoring, in some respects, or a lot of people are, the feedback that we're getting from it. We're not realizing or seeing what's happening for what it is, or a lot of people aren't. Most of the urban population isn't. And feedback is a way to control things, but it's a little late by the time you get the feedback to do something about it to prevent a problem. I'm having a hard time seeing. So this is how people actually work. When you're driving your car and you see a corner, you put your foot on the brakes because you know to put your foot on the brakes before you get to the corner. The feedback system says we run off the road and then realize that we need to straighten it, step on the brakes and then turn the wheel, right? But you know these things and you know to get ready, and then you use the feedback that you get while you're doing it to improve the knowledge. This is how we learn, this is what we do. And this is how we stabilize systems that are subject to progressing until there's a catastrophe. So if we look at what Native Americans did in the way of burning, they did it in grasslands with very high frequency. I'm thinking sometimes twice a year, believe it or not, that they could burn. And with forests, somewhat less frequently, but still more frequently than we like to think, right? But what we're doing is we're waiting until there's a catastrophe, takes it down, then you get secondary succession, and the successional level just gradually increases, okay? And you can see that where redwood has been dominant, because once that stuff is there, I mean, it's going to run the show. Tangling my feet. Okay, so this is the same Mesa Verde National Park right after the same fire, but what happened is that the Park Service had a parking lot and they didn't want to cause their prescribed fire to burn people's cars, so they cleared all the trees. There's one, there's another, so on. There were trees in here, and they clear cut it, and then they had their fire. That is the only difference between the stuff that you saw and this. Now, I'm not saying that it's going to be automatic like this. I'm not going to, I wouldn't be fool enough to claim that, because let's face it, musk thistles travel. And the seed from cheatgrass does too on dust devils, for sure. But regular disturbance doesn't restore native annuals if you've got exotics present. And this is a classic example here in Silicon Valley, right? I mean, you just disc it every year, you're going to get mustard. You're not getting anything else. Whatever's dominant is what's going to express. And your native annuals will not come back in a regimen like this. So what that means is that to restore native annuals, is difficult. And here's your key factoid. Native Americans had to have every plant resource that they relied upon to stay alive within walking distance. They had a life and death interest in biodiversity. That's why the system got the way that it was. And one of the things that you're seeing worldwide in preserves, there's a preserve in Germany. They tested the insect levels. In the last 20 years, they dropped 75% by mass. They don't know why. But I would submit that I'm betting they haven't done anything, and those trees' canopy closure is increasing, and you don't have as much biodiversity on the ground. You don't have as many forbs, and you don't get that many bugs. So, unless we develop the knowledge to learn how to manage these systems and get them doing stuff again, it's not going to happen. And that's a hard lesson. And who's going to be accountable for not doing it? We don't even think about that. But native plants need us because, as I said with our property, we had a 200-year deep non-native weed bank. Okay? And what that means is that I had to purge, or still have to purge, large portions of the property of that non-native seed bank in order for native seeds to have a chance. And the reason is partially weather. Has anybody here noticed that we tend to have what's called a bimodal rainfall system in this area, where you have a bunch of rain in the fall and a bunch of rain in the spring, and there's kind of this dry period in between? Pretty common. Well, the plants that evolved in this area evolved to learn that, right? You germinate the first time, and you die in that dry period, and that's not so good. So there are a lot of these plants that need, the seeds need what's called cold stratification for them to germinate, okay? 3 months of cold, and then they can go. They know there's been enough water. Well, if you're a seed that's like that, and you get a bunch of seeds coming in from North Africa, what system do they work on? Blow and die, right? So they try to make seed before they die. That's because what annual plants do, that's all they do is make seed. That's all they can do. So, wow, I don't know why the slide did that. Okay. So one of the first places we look is to history. How things were. The old how things were before the white man, right? Were the cause of all bad things. Okay, and this is Glenwood. There's the Glenwood Hotel. What do you see here? These are old growth trees. Okay? The guy who owned it, Charlie Martin, wouldn't let anybody touch those trees. They were his moneymaker. This was Charlie McKiernan's cabinet, or it belonged to a cousin of his, is my understanding. The landowner's letting it go, and I don't know why. It's a community asset. And what you see here on our property is the road that the Spanish built with 500 Indians with sticks and baskets in 1791. Do you see it? Let me help a little bit. It's right there. Okay? Slopes don't do that on their own. So, the Indians never told the Spanish how they did what they did, because they were dead by diseases, for the most part, before they could. And most of the people who were doing the plant management within the tribal community were women. And they weren't talking to anybody. They were just being used by Spanish soldiers. So all of that ended really quickly. The estimates are that the Sayante tribe, which lived along which used the trail that they had before Mountain Charlie was built. Mountain Charlie's right here in this picture. Okay, so this is Glenwood Drive right here. Okay, 1931. So all that knowledge was gone. Now, there's another thing that you need to see in this image from 1931 that's really important, because what's happening here is primary succession. You see all these clean spots? Well, they are ranches, farms, orchards, and vineyards. Those guys did not have the money to go in there and take down all the trees. There weren't any. What you see here, for the most part, is brush fields. And these darker spots, those are oaks moving in. Okay? So what you see here is the power of regular disturbance to restart the successional process, right? Okay. That's, I don't know what that is right there. 31 is before Highway 17. Okay, so Charlie McKiernan, this is where his ranch was, and this is Laguna del Sargento. Now, I'm putting this picture here because I'm going to ask for help with something. Does anybody here have a natural pond on their property? No? Okay, they're really rare? Okay, you got one. They are really rare up here. And these are repositories of pollen sediments that build up in layers over thousands and thousands of years. We really need that data. I know a good pollen scientist who could do that work, but the big deal is just to get the corings and have them stored. And that won't harm a landowner in any way, as far as I know. I've tried to talk this guy into it on this pond, but he's not been receptive. He's too paranoid. He wants to develop the property. I just think he should develop it, just something hipper. Okay, so we're back to Glenwood. He moved up to the mountains in about 1853. He homesteaded this valley, and the only way he could get there was by pack train at the time, until 1858, when Charlie McKiernan started to build the road. Oops, wrong button. Okay, so we're back to 1931. And in orange here, you see Mountain Charlie Road. And there's Station Ranch. And this was all uphill from Station Ranch, so right above our place was a changing station where they change horses. Okay? And so this is our place right here. But what's really interesting about this picture, or there are a lot of things really interesting about this picture. All right? So when the train came through in 1880, it was called the picnic train, and it went to two places, to San Francisco and Alameda. And the big deal to this story is that because it went to Alameda, if you were a botanist from UC Berkeley, you could be in the Santa Cruz Mountains in 2 hours. So they did. And this was the place they would stay. Well, why would they stay here? Why would they pick Glenwood? It was a happening place. So you can see a lot of people in this picture. There were 5,000 people a day going through this valley. This was ecotourism by rail. And as you can see here, he was doing advertising, and he was even photoshopping the advertising. Look at the little carriage on the left. There's just no way, right? Okay. I think it's hilarious. And there were luxury accommodations. Okay, so there were 3 hotels. There was a dance hall. There was a bowling alley. There was a conference center capable of handling 250 people. There were telephones. I think there was even electric light, but I don't know when that came in. So this was a place to be. If you were a botanist, man, that would be cool. Go there and bring yourself a co-ed and botanize all day and hang out around the fire with your leather patches on your jacket, smoking a pipe. Be a cool thing. Oops. Again. Okay, so why the 5,000 people? Because they wanted to see these old growth trees. That was his principal draw. Okay. Now these blue patches you see in this particular picture, oh, wait a minute, one other thing from this other picture, one of the most important things about it, I missed it. Look here. See that area in blue? That's a vineyard. Okay? Now look at it. Does it look like a vineyard anymore? The first was 1890. This is 40 years later. The vineyard had been abandoned, being invaded by trees. These patches were orchard land. The only remaining orchards were right here. And the reason were this road. This is the northern boundary of our property, and this road went down to Glenwood because before there was a Glenwood highway and before there was a train, this road was the only access to Glenwood from the Santa Clara Valley. So it was economically crucial to Charlie Martin. The Glenwood Highway was built in 1919 under the Department of War Department budget. And they ran cannons over the hill every year to make sure that they could continue to justify that piece of pork. And as part of that project, the Soils Conservation Service got involved and planted eucalyptus in this drainage because the water was collected by Mountain Charlie Road and brought down this drainage, and it was really causing channel incision in here, and the eucalyptus worked for that. It was very effective. And of course, it remains a fuel bomb today. Like that. Okay. Now, the interesting thing to me about the layout of Glenwood is this hayfield in the middle of town. Why would you have a hayfield in the middle of town? It reduces the transportation costs of moving the hay to the barns where the horses are going to be, right? That's the gas station of its day. Because herbivory was a big deal back then. Here's our vineyard for reference up here. But you can see these big areas, right? They're all clear. Charlie Martin ran goats. Other people were doing cows. And you can see these nice straight lines. Does anybody here know what those are? Anybody? They're fences, that's right. That's barbed wire. You can just see the power of herbivory, right, to change the type of vegetation. And you can see that still, this being 1931, this is still mostly brush moving in. But another interesting thing here is, but look at here. Here are trees moving in, right in this line. What would do that? Has anybody got a guess?
Water.
Huh?
Water?
Nope. Let's look at our place. Same phenomenon going on, but it's a little different. It's an apple orchard here, as you can see, except for this area right here. But right below the road, you see the red lines? Those are the downslope sides of the roads. All the trees on the downslope side, on this one, here, here, same thing. Trees coming in on the downside of the road. Well, here's your reason. Grading their dirt roads. They had to be graded. They pick up acorns. They drag them along the road. They dump them in the side castings. And off go the forest. Blows me away every time. So this is the growth on the property. There was a stand of redwood here. And this is not a stand, really. This is a collection of clones over here, and another area where we have them here. But then there was acacia. Why? And you'll notice that the acacia, this acacia here is right next to Ed Fenn's house. There's another building here with acacia next to it, and another building here with acacia next to it. Why? Firewood, that's right. It grows straight, fast, easy to cut, doesn't grow back from the roots. Don't have to split it, just throw it in the stove. Saves a lot of time and trouble. So they grew acacia. I wish they didn't. Okay, so this is part of our place. And can you see the effect of the orchard today here? Anybody? Terraces. And so what I know as a consequence of that is that wherever these terraces were kicked out, that the topsoils are deeper here and probably have more seed in them. And the distributions of what's going to grow there is going to be different on each one of those things. And that is how things turned out. And you can see here, this is the LiDAR image. This is on the, I'm going to do a shout out here for the county. It's kind of a rare thing from me. But this is their GIS system, the Graphical Information System. And I see this as a future resource for us if we use it right. Because we could have layers on this system, okay? Because they do have layers for it already. Where they put like storm drains on a layer and so on, right? Well, we could put a layer on it for turnouts, a layer for drainage problems, where we in effect talk to each other about these things and communicate about and come to agreements on what we're going to do to make things better. Because obviously the county doesn't have the money to fix a lot of this stuff, and a lot of the problems arise on private property anyway. So if we could help each other, right, notify each other, fix certain problems, this would be a great way to do that. So I'm talking to the county now, and there are people about it, but their software people are very excited about it, and management is a little skeptical. As one would expect. But there's something else on this image that I want you to know. See over here? Okay. This is a hard ridge of rock. And on this side of the ridge is a cliff. Okay, that's like 40 feet straight down. It's amazing. And it just ends. And so if you were Indians digging a road with sticks and baskets, you would not dig into that rock. Forget about it. And even Charlie McKiernan, with his dynamite and his horse-drawn grading blades, would find it a little bit daunting because there's just so much of it. So what they did was a little different than what you see here. But there's Ed Fenn right there at 16 years old on the right. And you see that horse? Has that horse got a chest on him or what? Isn't that amazing? That's the guy who pulled the harrows that made those terraces. Okay. So here's another thing to notice. This is 1948 again. This is a good, I would say, 15 years after Ed Fenn quit and left, because the Depression basically took him out. You see this area here, the brush has come in here, but it has not come in here. Well, what I was told by Charlie Martin's granddaughter was that there had been a fire in 1941. And fire, and I'm thinking that the fire quit right about here, because fire will germinate ceanothus. So that seed can lie dormant for probably a long time, really hard, got a thick coat on it, and the fire can scarify and feed it what are called carotenoids, that are hormones that break the dormancy in the seed and it'll go. But you don't see anything happening over here. Why? Well, the owner of this place down here, which was Charlie Martin's husband of Charlie Martin's granddaughter, Ed Koch, had put in some fence and was grazing this side. This is 1963. Now the blue overlay is the amount of broom there was.
Oh my God.
We had 10 acres of broom. And you can see the trees are invading like crazy now all of a sudden. Okay? There was so much broom that by 1983, when a fellow by the name of Murphy McFarland bought the place, he brought in bulldozers and they scraped it off and made piles 60 feet long, 20 feet wide, and 8 feet high of just broom. This is 1989 when we bought it. Live oak trees are invasive as hell. Repeat after me. We have found places on our property after I've thinned it where we have the equivalent of 8,000 trees of an acre of seedlings. It's just, I have had to invent tools and processes for dealing with it. It's just awful. But if you're going to have biodiversity, that's one of the things you have to learn how to do. And it's one of the things you have to learn will happen. Okay. So this is a really important principle that I'm going to talk about probably some more. You don't want to think that this is a long-term truth, but it's just as true for Aboriginal peoples as it is for us. And you'll see that in some of what it is I have to reveal. We talked about the oaks. Fir trees are bad too, invasive too. Redwood, not so much. But boy, once they take over, they don't let go. Okay. Herbivory stabilizes landscapes, but if it's going to be economic, you have to manage predation. And that's not popular. Uninterrupted succession is deadly to biodiversity, and exotics make it worse. None of these problems are easy to solve, and I don't pretend to be an authority for anybody else's property but ours. And even there, I would say that I have a lot to learn. And this is true. And that picture book that I wrote for you, all 2,000 pages of it, was as instructive to me in writing it as anything else could have been, because this was where I had to sit there and ask myself when I put it down in print, is this really true? Right? And if I don't really know, that's what prompts the questions that leads to the experiments that develops new knowledge. So it's a really powerful process, and it's something that I encourage to anyone who's really serious about learning how to do this. It's a vehicle with which we can communicate. Okay. So, how much time have I used up? An hour? Okay. I'm going to keep going. So I've talked about the ceanothus. Now, just in this red patch you see here, this outline thing, there's our next image. And this is something that when the Minped's botanist came to our place and she saw this, she fell to her knees. When I first saw it, I started crying. And it was not because I thought that anything I'd done was so awesome. It was because I was thinking about the people who had made this. These are blue dicks coming up. Does anybody here know what blue dicks are? Okay, it's a little bulb, okay? And they have this bulb is full of starch. And Indians relied upon it for food, big time. So did bears. Bears would dig them up. But the other thing that's important about them is they have what's called a contractile root. Okay, and that root would grow down, and in the wintertime it fills full of water. Potable water. Safe water. Okay. Well, the white guys get here and call them diggers. They had no idea, but they had dysentery more than the Indians did. Those are blue dicks in bloom. They're pretty. Checker spots like them. And just below the blue dicks were soap lilies. There were no blue dicks in the soap lilies, and there were no soap lilies in the blue dicks. And just beyond that patch, anybody here know what death camas is? Anybody with horses does, right? You don't want the horses getting into your death camas, that's for sure. 5 parts per million in a sheep will kill it. Okay, it is deadly stuff. It's called zygacin. It's a nasty toxin. Causes internal bleeding and other problems. Well, the death camas was just beyond the end of the blue dick patch. We got people digging in the blue dicks. How are they going to know what they're digging into? If it's summertime, for instance, and the leaves have dried off, how would you know? Because Native Americans had planted them in an orderly patch for specific reasons. Okay, so this is that patch right here. And these are some of the others that we have found since then. Okay, but there are your blue dicks, there are your soap lilies, but there are no soap lilies next to that death camas. But you can see the soap lilies all summer. So you know where it's safe to dig. But if the grizzly bears want your crop, do they know? No, they don't. Oh, you mean they start digging in your blue dicks and they wind up in the death camas and down they go. Good plan. Okay. All right. So, and if you wanted to deal with other predators, it was very handy. You dig up a death camas bulb and you mash it up and you stick it in the guts of a rabbit or whatever it is that you can kill, and you leave it there, and it's like cheap strychnine. If you're an Indian, you want to manage predation, this is an easy way to do it. And easy was important to staying alive. Since that time, we found these are globe lilies, patches of goldenrod, more patches of death camas, and one of the things you notice right away is that in 150 years, none of these plants have moved. Even with that horse terracing the place, even with it being torn up, they're all still in these defined patches. Now, why? Well, you do a little research on death camas, and what you find out is there's only one bug that pollinates them. It's a specific bee, and you don't find it around here. Oh, you mean they had to trade for those bulbs? Yes, they did. You won't find them on islands in the Santa Barbara Channel. Okay, no bears there. No predation problems. Okay. So this was, these are defined patches of what are called California tea. I don't know what they do yet or what they did with them, but they have amazing root systems. They're just incredibly tough. Big patches of blue dicks on this grassland on this ridge. And we have the soap lilies here, and globe lilies here. They were eating those too. So this is all really interesting, and it's a thing that is developing over time. And down here, okay, you see right here, this is Scutellaria tuberosa, otherwise known as skullcap. Anybody seen those here? Okay, this was a medicinal plant. Okay, and what do you know? Right next to it was death camas, and there was a line. I didn't put it on the picture because it's too defined. There's a straight line of soap lilies between the two. How do you find the skullcap? They're in little bulbs underground. Scutellaria tuberosa. tubers, right? Little roots. I think this particular spur has steep sides on 3 sides, would have made a handy-dandy place to have hunting fires around the outside of it, so you could trap the deer in the end of it and have yourself a feed. That was one of their primary means of doing hunting, as in groups, because the tribe would hang out up here with the fires on both sides and make sure that the deer couldn't get out. Okay? So what we're seeing here, though, this is where the Sayante Tribal Trail was. It's a long way from the nearest village. So why'd they have all this food out here? They didn't have pack animals. So, if you don't have pack animals, in order to carry payload, you can't be carrying food. You had to have your food resources along the trail. And yes, I'm the guy who told the archaeologists that. And I started telling them what they would and would not find around settlements based upon whether or not there were grizzly bears. Because they would not grow food for grizzly bears around their settlements. It's really, one of the things that I did that was really interesting was to scan Juan Crespi's diary of the Portola expedition in 1769 so that I could search it for what was not there. And reading a book for what's not there is a very laborious process, but it really works well with a computer, right? So what I found, for example, was that there were no fish weirs. Oh, but there was one. They discovered one fish weir on the entire Portola expedition from Mexico up and back down. And where was that? Anaheim. Why? Big flat plain growing miles and miles and miles of absolutely inedible chia sage, inedible to bears. And so they put their weir in the middle of that, because why would a bear want to go there? Otherwise, what a bear would do to your fish weir is just tear it apart and have a party, right? So that wasn't going to work. So that led to a general principle that a lot of what Native Americans were growing, and they went to a small seed economy over time, along with acorns, was that they were growing food around their villages so that their village area immediately around their villages would be bereft of food for bears. And the only places that you would find bears, and this was true throughout all 14 Spanish diaries that I read, was around places that were wet all season. Lake Elsinore, Crystal Springs Reservoir Valley, behind the hills in Richmond there, where El Cerrito is now. Out in Walnut Creek was kind of marshy. And I got to the point where I could read these diaries and predict where they were going to see bears. Or why were bears such a problem in California for Native Americans? It's really simple. They didn't hibernate in California. Because if you're a Native American and you want to whack a grizzly bear, when are you going to do it? When they're dead fast asleep, right? You don't want to do it any other time. Well, they didn't hibernate here. That was a game changer. This is why there was no farming in California by Native Americans as we understand farming. It just wasn't the same. But you go right over to the Sierra Nevada and they started doing irrigated farming. Because it got cold enough back there that they could whack bears. Okay, so Aboriginal requirement for biodiversity means native plants were selected to be controllable or unlikely to be aggressive. Randy Morgan, who was my favorite botanist, now deceased, used to say native plants are wimps. So native plants are either hard to propagate or unlikely to spread. and therefore open to invasion. This is why our weed problems are so serious and so difficult to reverse. Because even if you get rid of the weeds, even if you purge that seed bank, it takes time to get those native plants to propagate and to move around. It's just really a really slow process. Or at least it has been so far for me. Oh. Okay, so now I'm going to do an example. This should be fun. I don't know why this thing happened on this computer, but it did. This is my wife's computer. It's her fault. Okay. What you see here is skunkweed. Does anybody here know what skunkweed is? That's awful, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. Here's why it's awful. It not only has layers of skunk when it gets bruised, those spines are nasty, especially when they dry. They're really critical to certain kinds of bees called sweat bees. But I'll tell you, you get these things in your hands when you're weeding and you'll really regret it. Because they break off. And I think they're barbed. It takes a microscope to get them out. Okay. So, this is a trail. Indians were barefoot. Would you want to be walking in skunkweed barefoot? Not a chance, right? Well, they weren't that dumb either. So all along this lime green color that you see here, things were different. This is a hypothesis on my part. Okay, so we're just going to pave it. This is a beautiful grassland that I had in March 2013. Man, I had gorgeous needle grasses and clovers and lotuses and all kinds of cool stuff happening here. And gradually in comes this silvery looking thing you see here in bits and pieces, right? Okay. That's Gammachaeta ustulata, otherwise known as purple cudweed. Native Americans called it featherweed. There's a clue. I'm not sure they even know this. But the cudweed is known to ranchers to be toxic to wildlife, to livestock, because it pulls so much nitrate into its tissue. It's just, you eat too much of that stuff and you're going to get sick from your liver damage. But you can see here this cudweed pulling so much nitrate into its tissue. We're in April, and look at this freaking lupin right next to it, turning red. And it did the same thing to the grasses. Man, this stuff it's native, but this stuff is bad, right? Bad. That was my reaction. I didn't want it. Look what it did to my grassland. It's a perennial, too. So all it does is make more of itself. Like that. This is science. Sometimes bad things happen in science that teach you something, right? So that's what this is. Okay, well, some came to the hilltop we've got where we have a helicopter landing zone. And I tried to kill this stuff, and I failed. I just didn't have time because I was so busy dealing with non-natives. Oops. Did it again. Now you see how dense this stuff germinates. Okay, so it has more properties. It's kind of rubbery. It doesn't get very big. Would a fire carry across that stuff? No. Not a bit. That's interesting. Well, if you made a pavement like that, would the skunkweed grow there? No. Well, that's good. So maybe that's your pavement, right? But maybe it's something else, too. Okay. So if you're a Native American, you control things with fire. You might want to be able to limit your fires by time for whatever you might be growing in one watershed versus the next, right? This would be a way you could do that. You got your natural, quote-unquote, fire break, right? But the one thing you've got to do, you can't have that stuff take over the entire landscape. how do you stop it? Well, I think I've guessed how they might have stopped it. Parasitic plants. If you got a nitrate hog, all you need is a plant that sucks the nitrate out of their roots. Okay. And it turns out that the only place I have seen all these different kinds of native parasitic plants have been alongside that trail. Well, what do you know? Now, Jasper Ridge Biological Preserve is famous because, anybody ever heard of Dr. Paul Ehrlich? Dr. Paul Ehrlich, the famous anti-population guy, right? Okay. Well, he was an entomologist, he had discovered the Bay's checker spot butterfly was going extinct. And what he's doing now that it's gone extinct at Jasper Ridge is he's trying to go find places where it's still alive and make the ranchers preserve their land too. Somebody who's mistaking his feedback, right? Lacking knowledge. Well, what you see here on our property, right next to where that cutweed is growing, this is this year, and we've only had it for about 3-4 years, is owl's clover, and it's doing just great. And all these little tiny things, this is the stuff that I sweat in the weeding that I do. These are called slender woolly heads, Silocarpus tenuis, and they make kind of a white mat on the ground, which would reflect heat and retain moisture and make an interesting change in the ground cover, right, for the grassland, right? As long as the other plants got along. But I don't know to what degree. There are other plants there that are small like this that grow underneath the clovers and lotuses and other stuff. We actually have a 3-layered understory to our native grasses on this place, in places where I can sustain it. But right here, I think, if you see some yellow, that's a non-native dwarf hop clover that I haven't killed yet. The point is, this just came in right on the edge of where that cutweed was. It's interesting. So I don't know how to propagate it. I don't know if anybody else does. I sure haven't tried at Stanford. Okay. Last line. Right? This is just true. And it takes time. So I got a couple of other little things to show you. This grass is Calamagrostis rubescens. It never gets taller than that, maybe a foot tall. It stays green all summer. It grows by rhizomes, pretty much. Very rarely seeds. Actually hard to start by seed. So you can just put in some nodes and it'll take over a little patch for you. All you have to do is keep the brush out. And this is a patch that we have elsewhere on the property. See, that's been there for 20 years. Just like that. Does a nice job of keeping all the other stuff that you don't want to germinate in there from germinating. So it slows things down for you. And easy burn. And this one's going to be really popular. I don't know how many of you are on 95033 Talk, but I've extolled the virtues of the sedge. Okay, this is Carex barbari. Okay. And as you can see here from this yellow line, that is really steep ground. And that sedge has been on that steep ground right below the edge of this road for 30 years. Stable. All I have to do is keep the blackberries and poison oak from getting into it and taking over. And that's all. And that's like once every couple of years I do something about it. That's all. So otherwise really easy to deal with. But it has other virtues. Here it is in a drainage. And what I had done is I'd used wood to deflect the pathway of the water over the sedges This is all alluvial landslide material. So, I mean, it would erode in a heartbeat if it had a chance. But the roots of this sedge are so tough, the Native Americans called it white root sedge because they used it for basket cordage. That's why it holds these slopes. Okay, but that's why it's also so tough with the water. All it does is just lay down like a pavement. The water goes over the top. And so here I'm planting some. All you do is just dig some out of the ground and divide the wads and make nodes and put them in the ground and cut the leaves off to a couple, 3 inches and stuff them in the ground in November or late October. And they just take. So this is a spot where I've been over here on the top. I had this going for 4 or 5 years. And in this area, I'm preparing for it by getting rid of a lot of that exotic seed bank before I bring them in. Ripgut being the worst. So, and this is the coolest thing. This is real time. This is July under a permit California fire plan with CAL FIRE. But you can see this is hardly exciting, is it? And when it gets to the end, when there's no fuel, it just quits. Would you want this below your house on a hillside in a fire? Oh yeah. Would you want this alongside a road to deal with the alluvial, the fill bank on the outside? Absolutely, right? So it just makes this incredible mat that holds things together, and all you have to do is clean it up. Every couple of years you go out there and you torch it. And if you got a hose there to dose it on wherever it is that it's supposed to end, you're done. This was cool. And this is 1 month after the fire. Does anybody see the green stuff coming up? Okay, so this is August, right? I have not watered this. That's another month later. Does that say October? I think it does. August, excuse me. July. Oops, I'm going backwards. There's October. No water. And it'll do this in pretty much full sun. So it goes full sun to that alluvium you saw. That was down by redwoods. I mean, it was shady down there. But what got it going was I took down the bay on the ridge up above it. So enough light got down there to get it started. Built that root bed. So this is that same slope from the other direction. And so what I'm positing here is that you got this mat there that you want to hold there on the slope, and you need some occasional staples for the mat. And that's what the buckeye does. And the buckeye loses its leaves in the late summer, and so when the winter comes, the light gets there, stimulates the sedge, keeps it going, keeps the ground covers going, and buckeye is full of water all summer long. Even though it looks like it's dead, you take a chainsaw to that stuff and you're going to get wet. So it just doesn't burn worth a damn. So this is really an ideal shrub for holding together a ground cover on this steep slope. They're hard to start. Okay, so there's another buckeye. So I've decided that what I need to do now is to increase its architectural appeal. And so I'm going to start by, this is the yarrow. I'm growing that for nodes, and I'm going to put the yarrow nodes in the sedges, and maybe some irises. And then in the foreground, I've got this. This is Carex tumulacola. That bunch has been there for 10 years. Hasn't gone anywhere. Hasn't propagated itself. Well, so you mean if I dig it up and I divide it and I put out the little nodes, I'll get kind of a ground cover out of it? Maybe. I'm going to try it. This is science. This is fun. Okay. this is why we need children to learn to do this stuff and to see how cool it is, that we can make things better. This is that scuttle area.
I just want to make sure we could, thank you, Mark.
Thank
so
you very
much.
much.
Let's give her a big hand.
I think we debated that.